It is on Thursday, September 11th. It is the 24th anniversary of the 9/11 attacks against the United States. And I just thought I'd take a little moment to share with you what happened on that day from my perspective 24 years ago.
And welcome to SportsCenter. SportsCenter unlike any other here at ESPN. As then Baseball Commissioner Fay Vincent said after the earthquake that disrupted the 1989 World Series, quote, "Our issue is very modest compared to the disaster that has hit this community."
Yes, and today, that sentiment is magnified 1,000-fold. Sports is an afterthought. We fully appreciate that. We know that you do as well. Still, there is news to report tonight. In a day defined by pictures of devastation and death, the sports counterpoint is the image of ageless and graceful Wrigley Field, the Cubs and the Reds. They were scheduled to play tonight, but instead, tonight, Wrigley will stand empty. And that, in a word and in a picture, is where sports finds itself tonight, watching, waiting, and praying. All Major League Baseball games have been postponed tonight. It is the first time in 56 years since the death of President Franklin Roosevelt that baseball has postponed all Major League games for a reason other than a work stoppage. The National Football League is deliberating what to do with Week 2 games scheduled for Sunday and Monday. We will have more on that in a moment. And NASCAR has yet to announce a decision on this weekend's racing in Loudon, New Hampshire.
I was slated to do the 6 o'clock Sports Center that day, and I had started to go out for a run in the morning when I got a look at the television and realized that something really drastically wrong had happened. So I was sitting there watching the Today Show trying to figure out what was going on. And I remember saying, well, I got to go into work today. I got to go figure out what it is. And I remember getting in the driveway and getting in the car and thinking, what am I even going to do at work today? Like, what could we possibly say on a SportsCenter program that will have any significance based on the fact that our country has just been attacked? And as I was getting into the car, after the planes had struck the Twin Towers, my wife yelled from upstairs, "A bomb just went off on the Pentagon." And it was just like, whoa. And of course, it turned out to be another plane that hit the Pentagon. And then, of course, we had the plane that went down in Shanksville, Pennsylvania, United Flight 93. So I was just really in this very strange, weird headspace going into work. I was like, what is going on? What could we do today that would be of any significance or interest to any single American based on the events that had happened just a few moments ago? And I don't know if it's funny or ironic or just a coincidence, but this September morning that we're recording this is very similar to that day. It is a beautiful day, not a cloud in the sky here in Connecticut, high sun, warm temperatures, very, very eerily similar to September 11th, 2001. So I remember getting into work and nobody knew what to do. We were all just sort of sitting around trying to process. And this was about 10 o'clock in the morning. And we started to have these internal discussions with researchers, editors, executives. Do we even do a show today? Like, what's the point of doing a show about sports when no one could care less about that part of it? Because we as a country were under attack. And there were differing voices about how we should handle that and what we should do. And I remember Bob Ley was in the building that day, and he wasn't scheduled to be on the show that day. But he came in anyway, and he was sitting in part of these discussions. And, I was like, hey, man, what could we possibly say to people that would be of any interest to anybody at this point? Why don't we just cede our time and our airwaves over to ABC News? So wherever anybody could want to find out about something that was going on, they had access to it in a million different ways. I thought that was the prudent thing to do. I was of the opinion that we don't really need to do a show today. Let's just grant our time to something that is much more significant and much more important, and probably what most people want to know and hear and find out about. I was not the only one that had that opinion, but there were others, including Bob, who had a much different opinion. You know, Bob was a guy that I watched when I was in college, and I got a chance to work with him quite a bit. And he was like, look, at the end of the day, we're, at that time, a show about what happens in sports, documenting the events of the day. And he was adamant that we should do what we were going to do before the attacks. And I want to be clear about this. Bob wasn't saying ignore the attacks. Bob was saying we need to report on how these attacks have affected the world of sports. He said, that's our job. Like, that's literally our job, is to go out there and be the show of record, for lack of a better term, on how the events, I mean, nobody called it 9/11 when the day it happened. You know, we didn't, it wasn't in the language or the lexicon in any way, shape, or form in that way. We were just sort of dealing with the immediacy of the attack. It hadn't been, you know, for lack of a better term, branded or thought of as something like that. You know, he was adamant about doing that, and you know, it went through a lot of discussion with a lot of people in the building, and we eventually decided that we would go on and do a 30-minute show that day instead of the usual hour-long SportsCenter from 6 to 7. So we were going to go on and do a 30-minute show. You know, then the president came out and made an announcement. That was part of the show. And about 20 minutes into us doing the show, basically saying, hey, this is what happened. This affected here. You know, there were a couple of scouts for the Los Angeles Kings hockey organization that perished in one of the plane crashes. I think it was the one that hit the Pentagon. I'm not sure. I don't really remember that as clearly at this point. But after we'd gone about 20, 30 minutes, some of the executives had said, hey, can you guys keep going? Can you do this for a little longer? And we were like, sure. And I want to be clear in the way I frame this from my memory and my thoughts about that day. I wish that day had never happened. I wish that we didn't have to do a show that day. I wish that the events that framed that day never existed. But a large part of me will forever remember my experience that day. You know, I go back and look at my 23 plus years at ESPN and say, well, what were you proudest of? What are the things that really motivated you? What are the things that you look back and think of them? Obviously, creating NFL Live, doing the NFL draft, especially the COVID draft of 2020, where we had no idea what we were doing or how it was going to work, and somehow it went off without a hitch, which was remarkable. But I think, if I'm being honest, the thing that I might remember the most and be, in a weird way, the proudest of is doing SportsCenter on 9/11 with Bob. You know, we started to get word and indication that the NFL was thinking about canceling that Sunday's games. And that there was a huge controversy that the former commissioner of NFL, Pete Rozelle, did not cancel the Sunday games after John F. Kennedy's assassination, President Kennedy's assassination. And he would say it was the biggest regret he had in his life, and he wished he could have done it all over again and canceled those games. So, you know, for so many people outside of the Washington, D.C. area, the metropolitan New York, New Jersey, Connecticut area, and Western Pennsylvania, 9/11 was just something that happened somewhere else. The resonance of what happened and the immediacy of what happened on that day to us was in our backyard. And, you know, we had on commissioners of college football conferences on that show, and they were all still planning to go ahead with their weekend schedule of games in the SEC and the ACC and the Big 12. And then at some point during that show, that first day on September 11th, the NFL announced that it was going to suspend games. And they were not going to play on that first Sunday after 9/11. And that was the straw that broke the camel's back. Once the NFL decided they weren't going to play, every other organization, whether it was college football, baseball, everything shut down once the NFL made the decision that they weren't going to play. And I think it's when that happened that I think everybody across the country, remember this was pre-iPhone, this was pre-Snapchat, TikTok, Instagram, Twitter. It was a very, very different time. I think that announcement really brought home to so many people that weren't around it the way we were around it, just how significant the attack or the incident, whatever you want to call it, was. And once the NFL decided to pull the plug, everyone else decided, hey, we need to take a bigger picture look here and see what happened. And we did about, I think, 2.5 hours that night. And then they brought us back the next day and said, will you do it again? And Bob and I were the only two people that did SportsCenter, I think, for the first 3 days, maybe 4, after 9/11. And again, it wasn't called 9/11 back then. It was just called the attacks on America, basically. It hadn't been perceived the way it is perceived now, and it hadn't been branded by that date. None of us knew what was going on. It was all flying by the seat of our pants trying to figure this out. And, you know, to this day, every year on 9/11, I get a text from Bob and he gets a text from me just to say, hey, thinking about you today, and hope everything is well with you and your family. There was a researcher who became a producer at ESPN who had a bunch of his friends that worked at Cantor Fitzgerald, which was that trading firm at the top of 9/11. He lost 7 friends that day that worked at Cantor Fitzgerald. And to this day, I also text him. His nickname is Sluggo. I text him every year, thinking about you today, because of the things that he went through and so many other people went through. But he was the one person that I worked with at ESPN that sort of had that same experience as me. And had that same experience, rather, so many other people affected by it. So that's something that we do every year. We reach out. I reach out to Bob. Bob reaches out to me. I reach out to Sluggo and just let him know I'm thinking about him. It's really strange to think about how things are now in this country, because after the attacks of that day, September 11th, a really strange thing happened. On the steps of Congress, Democrat and Republican congressmen and senators got together, stood together, and sang God Bless America. And I'm hopeful, with the way things are in a very fractured United States these days, that we can get back to finding a way to work together and not consider ourselves, well, I'm this or I'm that. Because at the end of the day, first and foremost, we're Americans. And as tragic as that day was, it found a way to bring home that message in a very loud and clear way. So again, I don't want to dive into anything political here, but it's one of my memories is that I saw that happen, and I saw us united on that front. And the hope going forward is that we can find a way to be united again. So anyway, those are the thoughts on what has been a very it's a very interesting day for me every year, for a lot of reasons. Obviously, I think about how many lives were lost, and I think about the people that I know that were affected with it. But it changed things for me dramatically in the way that my world was shaped. And 24 years later, those are still some of the things. And again, I still talk to those people, Bob and Sluggo, every year on this day to make sure they're doing okay and just say I appreciated them for the things that they went through and the things that we were able to do together. And Bob was 100% right. That show, by the way, that we did still airs at the 9/11 Museum. If you walk down in there, that's one of the first things that they show when you go into the museum. So anyway, those are my recollections as we record this today and how it affected sports. And Bob was 100% right in the decision that he made. So anyway, those are the thoughts.